So one might ask, what's the problem? Customers are very satisfied. You're telling us that. We know that because they're throwing more business at us than we can probably handle. Your productivity is improving and your financial case is not going down. Why are we standing up here? What are we going to say? The simple thesis of this presentation is that our performance is better than our health. Our performance is better than our health. To tell you more, I'll hand it over to Vivek.
Thank you, Nosh. As we looked across BPO and IT services companies, I think one thing that we found quite starkly was that customer expectations evolve, not just evolve quite rapidly. And if I take an example, you look at BPO clients, by and large, their expectations, broadly speaking, they're moving from achieving cost equality to higher regimes, greater productivity, looking for benefits such as innovation. However, when you actually look at the underlying practices, guide customers' expectations, you see a very different story. Likewise, I'm going to show you in IP, as customers' expectations evolve, they're actually evolving in areas where our practices are relatively immature. So when Noshir talks about the health industry not being as strong as performance, what he's referring to is that the practices underlying our practices underlying the metrics that everyone looks at aren't as robust as we believe it should be. So to take an example, what we did in BPO was actually ask customers over a 12-month period to wait and to assign emphasis to where they want their vendors to focus their time, what mattered most to them. And as you can see, basic data over time, customers said cost and quality mattered most. However, with experience and with well-made practices and very disciplined institutionalization and rigor of company practices, what we find is over time the expectations moved on from cost and quality into areas of speed and flexibility. Fantastic. So the practices are well-made, outcomes are good, customers are experiencing something they hadn't before, and they're moving on to the next level. However, within the same industry, in many cases within the same company with a specialized voice, where the practices are not as well established. What we find is over time, companies are gone from saying customer quality are important, quality is all important. In other words, I don't want you focusing on a whole bunch of other areas like innovation or other areas such as risk productivity, which frankly I would love to have continued focus on quality. And the impact of this, frankly, is being seen in the industry now. When customers start to contract with us in areas where practices are relatively weak, they don't question how good your practices are. What they question is how good your people. And time and time again, what we found through our surveys, both benchmarks and the number of practices we trace, is that people are replacing practices. In other words, the industry is not relying on the star project managers, the star people, more experienced talent, and your customers starting to rely on that as well. Of course, the industry will everyone we're dealing with are short of capital, short of experience, that is not the sign of the industry. Likewise, in IT services, partly as a result of experience, partly as a result of desire to save more money, and partly as a result of desire to actually cost more risk. What we're finding is customers are asking vendors to move from what was traditionally an area of detailed design and coding and unit testing, fairly well laid out, fairly well designed instead. The same work, I would actually like to have you move the requirements gathering solution design. I understand the PN model works well for you. However, every time I need to change the spec, it costs me more. Right? Since I'm not as good at actually designing requirements, usually better at it. And as a result, we've seen that the industry is getting pushed into areas of requirements gathering.
what we have found is data processes on average are clearly performing better than areas on voice where we are seeing significant strains on the talent pool. Second, and this statement will endear me to the hearts of many of the third parties, at least for the first part of the statement, which is when we looked at the performance, roughly split of those 24 top BPO companies, split about roughly half and half between captives and third parties, we found that on average, third party providers outcompete captives on all practices and virtually all metrics. Third party providers outcompete captives on virtually all metrics and all underlying practices. However, it is absolutely true that the best-in-class captive outcompetes the best-in-class third party. The simple point is captives don't have to be weaker in performance, they just tend to be. Third, and I'm getting, as you can see, I'm getting increasingly more controversial in my statements. Location does not matter. For all of us who have spent countless hours, including us at McKinsey, saying, you know, is it Chennai, is it Bangalore, is it Pune, is it Hyderabad, is it something else? We will show you conclusive data to show that location of a center bears little on the real operating performance of that center. Fourth, we have not found a single example as yet, and I admit our sample is still small, but it's quite large enough to make at least an assertion that there is virtually no company in our sample today that by the eyes of their customers and by the eyes of their own people excel in even more than one process area. And finally, whatever I've said on BPO is true for IT services as well. Although I must say that IT services is far more mature in practices than is the counterpart in BPO. So let me take you through some of the data behind this. As you can see, we asked 162 processes split differently between voice and data on what was your SLA compliance this quarter and what was it the quarter before that. We don't want to make absolute comparisons between voice and data. We want you to look at the green and the red arrows, which are the trend lines. The simple point is, as you can see, data, we consistently improve quarter on quarter in terms of SLA compliance as one evidence of quality improvement. And that's actually a pretty phenomenal number if you look at it across this larger sample, 97.3%. Unfortunately, on the basic voice and the specialized voice as defined by scripted and unscripted voice, what we're seeing is not that same performance is not being replicated today. The distance and the drop is too statistically irrelevant. It's too small to make any comment on that. So today, don't take away from the fact that, look, are we in trouble in voice? The simple point is data is performing better than voice. The reason for that could be many, one of which is our talent pool on voice. As we all know, the yield curves are between 4 and 6%. The second point, on average, captives perform weaker than third parties. If you look at the left-hand side of the chart, what you will see is that on rules-based decisioning, one type of processing activity, the average third party for a comparable process to the average captive, removing any element of profit or other margins, the average cost of a captive tends to be 29% more expensive than the comparable third party. However, what's true on the right-hand side is absolutely valid, which is that the best-in-class captive drawn from that same sample outcompetes the best-in-class third party by a 14% margin.